Yeah, sure. Yeah, that'd be cool. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this year's Rayson Huang lecture. The late Rayson Huang was the vice chancellor of the university, president, and he always tells a story about traveling to Hong Kong. And he had to escape from the Sino-Japanese War. He was traveling with China. He would only bring whatever he was wearing, a little piece of luggage, and his violin, and because he loved music. And actually, we still have his violin in our instrument collection here at the University of Hong Kong. And Rayson Huang founded the music department over 40 years ago. So really owe Rayson Huang a lot. And because the music department has had a huge influence, not only in Hong Kong, but in Asia and globally across the world. So Rayson Huang, if you're listening up there, and thank you very much. We should give him a round of applause, actually, to remember him. And Rayson Huang will be delighted that we're not just doing a lecture, a Rayson Huang lecture. Actually, we're doing a kind of Rayson Huang event, because this lecture is tied to a series of things that we have been doing over the last 2 years to make something happen. And you'll hear more about that in just a minute. And he would be delighted that our Rayson Huang lecturer for this year is the multi-award-winning composer Carl Vine, who is also teaching orchestration and composition at the Sydney Conservatorium. Now, Carl Vine has written many pieces, many concertos, many symphonies, many sonatas. So you would probably figure out that he's a kind of mainstream, Western, modern, classical music kind of composer. But he does a lot more than that. He's very versatile. He's also written for stage. He's written for screen. He's written, is it the official arrangements of the national anthem for Australia? An arrangement, but it's often done. But he's also written the closing ceremony music for the Olympic Games in Atlanta, is that right, as well? So many, many things that he has done. But he's also done a lot for music in Australia. He was the music director of Musica Viva Australia for almost 20 years, starting from 2000 to 2019. And as that director, he really shaped the journey of classical music across Australia and also new music as well. And in 2014, for his services to music and for his compositions, he was honored by being on the Queen's list and appointed, the Officer of the Order of Australia.
That's it.
Did you actually meet the Queen, Her Majesty? Oh no, it's very, very posh, but there we go.
I met a governor.
You met a governor instead, all right, anyway. So he's a very much decorated person. Actually, speaking of the Queen, I should also introduce you to someone who's met King Charles III, which is Pum right here, Pum Pramachat, who is, could you like to stand, Pum, actually? Because he's also instrumental in our plans for this weekend. So Pum is a wonderful pianist, and he met King Charles, so I think he was Prince Charles at that time, at an award ceremony. But Pum and I met about 2 years ago now, 2 years ago, and we were just chatting at that time, and Pum actually did his dissertation on the music of Carl Vine, so he's the world expert on Carl Vine. But he's also an amazing pianist, and we're thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could commission Carl Vine to write a piece? And the reason is this. Carl is one of those composers whose music actually becomes standard repertory within the world of classical music. And that's very difficult to do, standard repertory. So, for example, his first piano sonata is recorded many times, played many places. And if you were wanting to, take part in the Van Cliburn piano competition, that's one of the pieces that you can actually play in that competition. So he's, in the repertory. And so Pum and I were thinking, what would be great to sort of create, to add to that repertory? Can we commission a piece of music by Carl that would become standard repertory, in the future? And so we devised this idea of having him write a fantasy, because fantasies, are a good length, about 10 minutes, right? They're easy to insert into a program. And I don't know why, I think we must have been talking about God or something, but we decided we would commission Carl to write a divine fantasy. And so with the help of the United Overseas Bank and the Muse team, the cultural management team, Sharon, thank you. Sharon, can you stand up too? Because Sharon actually is also amazing. in making things happen. So actually, with the help of Sharon, the bank, and the music department, of course, we actually commissioned Carl to write a piece which has become the Fantasia Divina, which is basically divine fantasy in another language. And then Carl got very excited about this commission and decided to write another fantasy, which is gifted to Pum. And so we got 2 fantasies for the price of 1, which is really, really good. And then he was so inspired. In fact, you wrote another fantasy as well for another pianist. So there are now 3 fantasies, and they form a set. So on Sunday afternoon, you have to come to this concert that Pum is playing in, because it will be the world premiere of 2 of these fantasies, right? The Fantasy Divinia, the Cerulean fantasy, and also the Gothic fantasy has already been premiered. But it will always also be the premiere of all 3 fantasies in one set. So this will be a very historic occasion. And if all goes to plan, these pieces will become standard repertory in the future. That's the plan, Carl. We'll try and make that happen. So that's what's happening this whole weekend. That's been the plan for the last 2 years. And this is why Carl Vine is here. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Carl Vine as he talks about his new piece.
Thank you very much, Daniel. You've saved me introducing the first page of my speech.
Oh, good.
So that's been done. There we are. Good. And look, it is a great honour to deliver the Rayson Huang lecture for 2025. Daniel's just said everything that I was about to say. I don't think you said that this piece, Fantasia Divina, is dedicated to Pum. And this piece, of course, will be the subject of this lecture. So Pum asked me if the fantasy could be divine, was what I remember. And in English, divine can have the simple meaning of delightful, which is awfully mundane. But for me, the Italian version, Fantasia Divina, suggests something more supernatural and superhuman, hinting at the mystical aspect of the incredible skill of a virtuoso pianist. So this work focuses on producing multiple waves of sound that is hard to imagine emerging from a single instrument or from just one musician. So in this talk, I'll demonstrate the techniques I've used to conjure these mystical waves for solo piano. Over my lifetime, I've composed more than 5 hours of music for piano, so it's increasingly hard to invent original techniques for the instrument that I haven't already thoroughly exploited. I love piano music of dazzling virtuosity that is easier to play than it sounds. Pum will disagree because he's telling me it's all too hard, but that's what pianists do. But it turns out that if I can achieve that, it's what pianists love, of course, is playing music that will showcase their talent while not being completely exhausting to prepare. This is a challenge in the composition since musical ingenuity must be coupled with a deep, informed understanding of the keyboard's contour and its topography, the shape and placement of all the keys, black and white, and how that influences the way that our hands can move over them. So I've termed this the divine topography. The impact of keyboard topography can be easily seen in simple arpeggios. So that's simple enough. Now let's look at it with the fingering, where the thumb is numbered 1 and the index finger through to the pinky are numbered 2 to 5. Note how the A flat at the start is not played by the thumb, but by the 3rd finger. You'll find out why shortly. The thumb, I think this will work. Why is that not working? I'm supposed to be able to scroll through this. Oh, it's not. It's there, isn't it? Sorry. I've been using, I don't normally use an iPad. I've been using it for 3 days while I'm in Hong Kong, and everything has touched the screen. Sorry about that. So here we have, at the beginning of, there it is. I should have checked this out. There we are. So you can see at the beginning, there's the third finger rather, on the A flat. And you can see that the thumb is underneath. Then 1, 2, and 4 are ready for the next octave. And then from 4 to 1 is a very easy transition. That is called a thumb crossing. So the thumb goes under the fourth finger, and then the whole thing can repeat. And it's very comfortable, very smooth, and can be repeated indefinitely. So that thumb crossing technique is fundamental to piano playing and is governed by the keyboard topography. Note how the hand is thoroughly relaxed, positions easy to maintain, smooth, and easy to repeat. The flexibility of the thumb is preserved at each octave because it crosses from a black note to a higher white one, and the interval is close. The thumb is only a third away from the previous finger. But that combination isn't always possible. Let's say that because of what was played just beforehand, the thumb needs to start on A flat. So you'll notice at the beginning that fingers 1, 2, and 3 are very comfortable at the beginning. We'll go there. 1, 2, and 3 are very comfortable, but the moment that you are going from a black note to a black note with a thumb crossing, the hand has this massive rotation, which means that you cannot do it smoothly the way that you can with the other fingering. So what you have to do instead is jump. So you jump once you get to 3, then you have that jump there. Now, you can play that smoothly, but it's quite difficult and it's a lot more effort to do that. The effect is even worse if the chord is in second inversion and the thumb needs to start on E flat. And so you can see once again at the opening, it is 1, 2, and 4 are in perfect position, but going from the white to black note means that the hand is completely rotated around. You cannot do that smoothly. So once again, your only option is to leap. And so this is the leap here. You'll see the leap happen right there. So you can do it and you can cover it up, but it's not nearly as smooth as having the good fingering. So this consideration of hand position and thumb crossing is fundamental to creating idiomatic music for the piano. The simple question of whether the melody travels from white notes to black or vice versa, and how far the thumb stretches from the previous finger have a profound impact on the smoothness of the passage or whether it's playable at all. So when I was trying to create continuous waves of sound for Fantasia Divina, I had to be acutely aware of hand positions and the sequence of chords that would be easiest for the pianist while being most useful compositionally. It's much easier for pianists to learn and memorize patterns that are regular or repetitive, but these can easily be dull. Arpeggios of plain major chords are easy to play, but harmonically uninteresting, and greater invention is required. So after weeks of experimenting, I came up with this, my divine arpeggio. So that there is the divine arpeggio, and it sounds like this. I'll just play it again. It's an interesting harmonic structure, neither simply modal, nor tonal, nor atonal, and it has some very useful characteristics. So it features an easily recognizable sequence of dominant seventh chords that raise by a minor seventh at each step. So we start off with G7, F7, E flat 7, D flat 7, and then the pattern mirrors exactly in reverse on the way back down, creating a symmetrical harmonic structure. Now look at the fingering. You'll see that each of these chords begins on the thumb, ends on the fourth finger, and then the thumb begins again the next dominant seventh, and then it begins again on the next dominant seventh. So each of these crossings are from, that one is from white to white, from white to white, then from black to white, and there's no crossing up there. So there's no white to black or black to black. So they are all very easy to achieve. Here then is how the hand moves across that whole pattern at slow speed. Now that's my hand, and I haven't played the piano for 35 years. And so you can see it's actually terribly easy to do that. And you'll notice each time there's the thumb crossing there, you can't even see the thumb crossing. So from the fourth finger to the thumb, then we go up here, fourth finger on the white, thumb on the next white, going up on the next one, black to white, once again that thumb crossing, and then going back down, exactly the same thing, all of the same patterns apply. So just watch it again in slow motion. And then this is what, to remind you, what it sounds like at full speed. And although I'm not a pianist, I can actually do that just the once. I can't do a whole stream of them. So it's a very useful pattern. It's also surprisingly easy to learn thanks to the clear chord structure and the repetition. And don't forget that it has this stunning effect at full speed. Because the entire harmonic gesture fits comfortably under one hand, the other hand is free to do something completely independent, like add a lead melody at a contrasting dynamic level. Most important, of course, is how the whole complex sounds and its harmonic implications. So if we look at its harmonies, you'll notice the chord segment in the left. Is that going to work? Yes, it is. The chord segment at the left begins and ends the whole passage, which is a diminished seventh chord on A flat. But because it's immediately followed by that G7 chord, the A flat functions as the minor ninth of the G7. So it's actually a G7 minor 9 chord. As the higher chords enter, they introduce more unique pitches from the chromatic scale, eventually presenting 10 out of the total 12. So it's almost a chromatic cluster. It's almost all 12 notes with only F sharp and E natural missing. But because of the way we perceive tonality linked to the natural harmonic series, this opening G7 flat 9 chord, because it's at the lowest register, it predominates. All the extra notes added at higher pitch have less and less impact on the perceived harmony and act more like enharmonic resonance of bell sounds. So you can hear this reduced effect in the isolated chords where the low G7 is followed by the upper pitches in turn. So this is just the chords themselves. There we go. The wrong bit. There we are. So that's all of the 10 pitches out of the 12. But if you listen to the first few chords, you still don't lose the sense of the G7 chord, even though the higher pitches are coming in. The G7 flat and 9 still predominates. So over that prevailing G7 flat 9 chord, the left hand introduces a slow melody spanning the entire passage. That's the slow melody there. Notice how it doesn't interfere with the register of the arpeggio. It occupies a complementary range, so it's easier to distinguish from the arpeggio, and the pianist's hands can easily delineate the two elements. So although the arpeggio pattern repeats bar by bar, the melody occurs on different beats across the whole 7 bars. It's a simple stepwise melody, almost modal, but in a mode on F flat rather than on G, so that works against the G7 to create tonal instability. Here's an example of that playing, so it's just the G7 chord with this melody. The two unexpected high notes resonate with the enharmonic upper parts of the arpeggio. And the complete passage at performance speed sounds like this. So that was the divine arpeggio part of Fantasia Divina, made as simply as I could make it so that you have this incredible arpeggio happening all the time, and the other hand can actually play something very slow and as I said, almost modal, but not quite. The next technique I'll examine, even though it's another arpeggio, I'll distinguish by calling the divine ostinato. So ostinato is the Italian word for obstinate, used by musicians to describe motifs that keep repeating themselves. It uses another piano technique, hand crossing, where an arpeggio is divided between the two hands. Each four-note chord here fits comfortably under each hand. The left hand plays black note groups and the right hand plays white ones. So there's a symmetrical pattern that allows the left arm to cross easily over the right. Each left hand group starts on the fifth finger on the pinky and ends on 1. The right hand groups start on 1 and end on 5. This sensitivity to keyboard topography makes the passage extremely easy to play smoothly and at a constant dynamic while ensuring that the arms don't collide. Although parts of the pattern are playable in one hand, the full passage isn't. Note how each four-note chord is separated by a rising semitone. B flat at the end of the first group, followed by B natural, then G to A flat, G flat to G natural, and then so on, going up the list. Although each four-note group contrasts in sonority, they all connect via semitones. So whether we're aware of it or not, especially considering the rapid performance speed, this still creates strong intervallic relationships. Being an ostinato, the pattern repeats every bar for the whole passage, with slight variations where necessary to generate a unique lead melody. Consistent dynamic is vital here as it exploits an important piano characteristic, the way that passages with differentiated volume levels can be made to sound like independent voice layers. So as the ostinato keeps repeating softly and uniformly, it's perceived as occupying its own layer. The harmonies here are more complex than in the divine arpeggio. So although the sequence only contains 7th and 9th chords, they've been juxtaposed to create more dissonant tonal relationships. The 6 chords collectively introduce all 12 notes of the chromatic scale, but the tritone between the opening 2 chords, the G flat 9 and the C major 7, being the lower sounding chords, again will predominate the harmony. Listen to the chords. So this is the chords themselves without the arpeggio part. I'll play it again. So listen one more time, but focus this time on the 2 lowest chords. There it is. See how they dominate the harmony despite the other chords coming in, because they're at high pitch, they don't affect your ear as much. So remember that the intention here is to create waves of sound, not just flurries of fast notes, but also pitch complexes that weave harmonic mists that are neither particularly tonal nor atonal. Each hand in between the notes they repeat in the ostinato adds other single notes at a higher dynamic to form this independent melodic line in a distinct separate layer. Note how the ostinato is repeated every bar. This doesn't quite align, but in fact that, just because of the spacing there, it doesn't quite line up. The independent melody is marked in red. We can't see red terribly well. The notes in green circles are notes that have been changed within the ostinato to create the independent melody. So that E natural here is up there, so it's been taken down an octave and given to the left hand. However, it sounds like the ostinato is still continuing, unchanged, and the hand positions don't need to be adjusted. All of this happens with as little movement as possible between the hands. Looking at the next passage, there's the secondary voice down there. You can see the left hand's playing that, and then it comes back to strike that A flat again. This again is a changed note. Originally that should be up there. And goes down to the lead voice again. And once again, those notes are changed and those notes are changed for the same reasons. And then at the end, this note on the on the left hand, and then meanwhile the ostinato is running all the way through it. The notes in the melody use common intervals that we've seen before. The augmented fifth on the third line starts on A flat, ends on E, which is part of the ostinato but it's been shifted, as I mentioned. The following tritone, E to B flat, echoes the harmonic tritone G flat to C at the start of the ostinato. The second page has another tritone, the G to the D flat, and descending perfect fourths. From there, the F, C, and G, and then a series of descending minor seconds going down there to the E. So all of these intervals have a certain characteristic that carries throughout the work. And just to remind you, this is what the whole passage sounds like at tempo. Wrong one, I gave the game away. That's not it. If only. It will be this one. There we are. I should mention here that this method of creating piano music using keyboard topography to influence melodic and harmonic invention is neither radical nor new. Composers have used it for centuries to create idiomatic keyboard music that sounds impressive but is easier to play than it seems. I'm not aware of other composers having exposed those methods as candidly as I'm doing today, lifting the lid, as it were, on our secret construction techniques. But evidence of the approach can be found throughout the repertoire. Consider, for instance, the masterful Ondine by Ravel from his suite for solo piano, Gaspard de la Nuit, and although I've given the game away, this is it. Now look at the position of the hands in this particular passage. Note how the hands overlap and the fingers are heavily interwoven, but in such a masterful way that every finger can still operate independently. This is no accident, of course, it's Ravel. He's used every note in the D sharp major scale over an octave and a half, plus a few others, splitting them between the hands to produce two discrete layers, a primary melody floating over a rocking rhythmic backdrop. The choice of pitches and their disposition on the keyboard are tightly interlinked and brilliantly aligned. And just to remind you, this is what the original sounds like at performance speed. But surprisingly, even some orchestral music also shows the influence of keyboard topography. Consider, for example, Dances of the Young Girls from Stravinsky's groundbreaking Rite of Spring. Stravinsky often composed at the piano. In this passage, on a piano, the right hand just plays an E flat 7 chord, and the left plays F flat major. Notice how comfortably the fingers sit on those chords and how naturally the hands lie in that position. The two diatonic chords are juxtaposed to create a complex composite chord. It's easy to see how this combination could arise simply from sitting at a piano, and it's likely that Stravinsky discovered the shimmering interaction of the two chords just while tinkering at the keyboard. And if you're skeptical, here's a rare clip of Stravinsky himself discussing that chord.
I like very much his chord. Was rather a new chord, you know, of 8 notes chord. But the accents were even more new. And the accents were really the foundation of the whole thing.
I love that demonic look he has when talking about his love for that chord. At the start of this passage in the score, Stravinsky treats the two chords as a single compound unit to emphasize the pulsating rhythm, full of harmonic promise. It's only later in the passage that he pulls them apart to exploit their independent polytonal potential. I use the same compounded harmonic effect in Fantasia Divina. So in this passage, you'll notice at the start there's a simple A7 chord overlaid with G7 plus a 9. A7 is G7 plus a 9. That whole complex then moves up a minor second, B flat 7 overlaid by A7, and then moves back to where it started. And that all sounds like this. In the next measure, the whole complex, note also, of course, the comfortable position of both hands and how the fast running notes cross fluidly from one hand to the other. There are always 4 notes sitting below the lead melody line, played by the right hand pinky, and all the 7th chords use natural hand positions with all fingers perfectly relaxed. The regularity and recognisability of the pattern make the passage easy to learn and easy to memorise. Easier, still not that easy, but easier. The combined harmonic pattern is repeated on the 2nd line, but this time, instead of returning to the starting point, the complex moves up another tone to increase tension through ascending motion and the subversion of expectations. So this is the 2nd line. So if I play the 2 lines in sequence, they sound like this. The pattern evolves further on the 3rd line, starting a whole tone higher and using more complex diminished chords instead of the dominant 7ths. Like the 1st line, this one returns to its starting point. The low notes in the bass have the same melodic contour, rising a tone then falling back, but now relate more dissonantly to the top voice in the right hand. As the music progresses, the complexity of the chords increases and the combined melodic motion continues to evolve. Also note how the register keeps moving upwards. So this is the top line. By the following line, these combined chords are hard to analyse using standard tonality. They've evolved their own complex character while still loosely anchored to a tonal foundation. But the sustain pedal F sharp in the bass provides a solid foundation, but when it shifts down to F natural, the upper melody moves upwards in contrary motion. Here is the whole passage played at performance tempo. Note that there is to be no pedal in this section, allowing the smoothness of the arpeggio structure to sustain the harmonies without further enhancement. So those, in brief, are the principal techniques I use in Fantasia Divina. Next, I'd like to examine how the notion of the divine evolves through this divine fantasy. These days, we generally imagine the divine invoking benevolent states that will improve our own lives and the general state of humanity. The divine represents the ideals of peace and achievement to which we can aspire. Fantasia Divina opens using this philanthropic view of divinity, which you can see in a soft, fast harmonic sequence that I'll call the Divine Mist. This uses all of the techniques I've discussed, paying close attention to hand placement and finger positioning to exploit keyboard topography. Black note groups again alternate with white ones to maximize playability and enrich the harmony. Individual chords are mostly minor 7ths, lending each amalgamated chord some sense of tonal grounding. Each gesture is designed to sound as lush and suspended as possible, the mystical and magical aspects of the divine. The register of this mist is chosen carefully. Much lower on the keyboard and it will become muddy, much higher and it will be tinkly or insubstantial. In this middle register, each sonority is clearly articulated and enhanced by the sustain pedal to create a shimmering texture. And this is how it sounds at performance tempo. Sorry. Let's examine each line in more detail. So you can see again how comfortable the finger and hand positions are and how the hands can cross easily without obstruction. Thanks to the keyboard topography, both hands can maintain a consistent shape while outlining different sonorities. Each of the following amalgamated gestures is equally considerate. And here. Notice in this one, at the first hand crossing, which is right there, right hand crosses the left hand, but that actually leaves plenty of space for the left hand then to cross underneath the right, and enough time for it to go down the bottom and anchor into its new position. So all of this informed the particular pitches that were being used and where they were on the keyboard. And as a varied recapitulation of the first entry, here again is the entire sequence at performance tempo, and remember this is our first encounter with the divine mist. As the music evolves, so does its approach to divinity. Looking back to the Jewish God of the Old Testament and the Torah, if you displeased him, you risked being turned into a pillar of salt or being smitten with a plague of frogs. Zeus, the king of the ancient Greek gods, spent a lot of his time impregnating women against their will, occasionally disguised as a farm animal. These are not the actions of benevolent deities. And ancient gods were more likely to be implacable and unforgiving than mystical or revelatory. At its centre, the music shifts to the ancient divine, less misty and hopeful, more aggressive, and confronting the vengeful god. The first thing you'll notice is that the hands adopt more traditional roles. The right hand dominates in the treble, while the left contributes a strong bass line and softer accompaniment layer. The left still takes advantage of comfortable arpeggiated triads so they can emerge at a lightning speed. The right hand adopts the primitivism of open fifths, alternating with the devil's interval of the tritone. The fifths in the right hand move in stepwise motion to create a melody of G, A, B, right there, recalling the stepwise melody in the upper voice earlier. Likewise, the tritones echo fragments of the divine arpeggio, but now as a vertical expression of the horizontal melodies. While not exact repetitions of the previous intervals, unity arises through the use of these strong motivic patterns, an economy of means that makes many variants from a small pool of intervallic motifs. The harmonic realm here is also more straightforward, with the first group of 4 bars centering around E minor, alternating with the subdominant A minor, leaning towards the A diminished 7th. The next 4 bars centers on C sharp minor, alternating more or less with the dominant G sharp. And the final 4 measures, The final 4 measures of the passage are softer, centering on the new dominant G sharp with a combination of major and minor characteristics. The two bars repeat, but the right-hand melody is then harmonised in thirds, a stark contrast to the high fifths and tritones a few measures beforehand. The whole passage sounds like this. Moving now to the end of the piece, many of the techniques we've explored are revisited and expanded in the coda. Let's look first at the harmonies. This borrows the chord progression from the divine arpeggio, where consecutive dominant sevenths rise by a minor seventh, starting with A7 to G7, but now instead of rising by step, each pair of chords leaps by a fourth, either augmented or perfect. This new pattern gives the sequence an entirely different harmonic effect from the divine arpeggio, while the easy finger positions and logical repetitions still make it easier to play and to memorize. The second line uses rapid attacks alternating between the hands, so that's this passage here, to produce double the speed of repetition that either hand can achieve on its own. This technique isn't used anywhere else in the work. Traditionally, coders wrap things up by revisiting earlier material, but this technique of introducing new textures in the coda was actually popularized by Beethoven, who often did it in his piano sonatas. The figure again combines tritones with perfect fourths, echoing the melodic essence of the vengeful god. On the third line, the right hand features a set of seventh chords, again rising stepwise, a mix of dominant major and minor sevenths, that's through that passage there, using only white notes. The Dorian modal nature of that segment is offset by the strident chromatic motion in the bass. Again, notice the contrary motion between the two hands, heightening the tension. The next line continues with rising seventh chords in the right hand becoming dominant sevenths, incorporating both black and white notes. Meanwhile, the bass line continues to descend by semitone, reaching a low E down there, to echo the prevailing root of the previous section. The last three measures use a whole tone scale divided between the hands to highlight the tritone at its core. This pattern and rhythm also don't appear elsewhere in the work, providing a unique and powerful frame to declare the end of the composition. The whole passage sounds like this. At the end of a talk like this, I'd normally play the whole work so you can appreciate the cumulative effect of these techniques laid out end to end. But since the concert on Sunday will be the world premiere, I thought it better to leave the complete revelation up to Pom Promachart and his live performance rather than play you an uninspiring electronic simulation. So through the careful consideration of keyboard topography, natural hand placement, interweaving textures and unexpected harmonic combinations, I hope to have created a work that evolves organically, dazzles the ear, and is satisfyingly idiomatic to perform. Although Pum tells me it's not nearly as easy as I think it is. We'll see. As I said earlier, these methods are not new or unique. They've been used many times before, but I'm not aware of any composers who have worked in precisely this way, nor who have demonstrated their working process so openly. And I hope you appreciate this private and detailed insight into the creation of newly minted music before it has ever been heard in public. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl, so much. Yeah, thank you. It was amazing. It's amazing to hear your thoughts on this before it all happened. So it's a real privilege. We have a few minutes for some questions. I think it'd be great to ask Carl about either this piece or, in fact, the very interesting sort of technical elements that he was sharing, because it's not every day that a composer tells you how he writes a piece, particularly because it's about your interrelationship with the keyboard, with that instrument, and the role of an object, basically, in controlling how you think. So that's really fascinating for me. So, are there questions, please? And we can get a mic to you.
So it was all perfectly obvious.
It's like, dude, we do this all the time in Hong Kong. No. Yeah, there's a question here. Oh, you can use my mic. Use my mic. Here we go.
Hello, Carl, and hello, Professor Chia. I'm Melody, Hong Kong-born pianist and also alumni from Sydney Conservatorium of Music. So it's great to see you in Hong Kong, Carl, and we're very happy to have you here. I just have a question out of curiosity. As I pay attention to your explanation, I noticed that the whole tone scale was a highlight at the end. I'm not sure whether I'm being too naughty to say that. Did you think about the whole tone scale when you constructed Divine Arpeggio? Because I could see some of the nooks might form a whole tone scale as well. So maybe I'm interpreting in my way. And the second question is, whenever, maybe I'm speaking from a pedagogical point of view, whenever we see titles like Fantasia and Divine, we will associate with narratives, and perhaps this is a good way to encourage children to engage with the music. How do you feel for performers to perceive your work in this way? If you might be generous to share your insights with us, please. Thanks.
I think those are two very good questions. About the whole tone scale, the thing about the whole tone scale is that, particularly the way it's presented, is it comes back to the tritone. And the tritone throughout is an incredibly important interval at every step. The other thing that's very important is stepwise motion. And it's normally major and minor seconds. Whole tone scale, of course, is all major seconds. But it is a combination of those things. It's the only time in the piece that I really use a whole tone scale, baldly like that. But it was at the end saying, well, this is what has been hidden all the way through. And it was like bringing together all the minor seconds and making them major at the end. Yeah, but it's just like some sort of culmination. And I was not going to do it because it doesn't appear anywhere else, but it just felt right doing it there. But in terms of all the other harmonic analysis, you're right, it doesn't really make sense. As for the interpretation of the work, the divine idea was poems. I liked the idea of approaching a more nuanced view of divinity and of human divinity. So if I had a religion, it would be humanist. So spirit. There is no narrative. There's except for referencing the antagonistic god, or the idea of ancient gods, basically being rather self-centered. Yeah, but definitely at the opening, the spiritual aspect, without going into meditation music, which is, I think, it is the pond scum of musical invention. But yes, so there is no narrative, but to touch on elements of the divine in fairly obscure ways. Yeah. Anybody else?
Other questions? Mm-hmm.
Thank you. My favorite passages in Chopin are extremely uncomfortable to play, very difficult. Even in mazurka, the mazurkas are very hard to play. So I'd like to excavate a little bit your understanding of the notion of what constitutes idiomatic, because Chopin obviously thought that what was idiomatic was whatever the piano could produce, irrespective of how intuitive or comfortable the result will be for the pianist. And I think a lot of Beethoven is also very uncomfortable. So how can we reconcile these two views of what idiomatic writing?
I think you're absolutely right about Beethoven, but I think he was very inconsiderate. He didn't really care much. But I think Chopin cared very much. But as you know, he invented a lot of the approaches that we do, and in the studies intentionally, he's stretching as far as he can. My issue was that I have written a lot of piano music, and if you add it all together, it is about 5 hours. So I'm always trying to find a new way into the instrument. So this was, my way of trying to find something different. I think Ravel, for instance, and particularly all the time, is absolutely looking at hand position and what he can do with that. There are different approaches, obviously. And the other thing I'm aware of is if the idea is of making it simple, then you are actually just writing simple music. What I'm looking for is a solution that bears in mind that you have 10 fingers and only 2 hands, and you can't separate the fingers from the hand. You have this sort of all of these distances. How can I manipulate that in a way to get the most results without expecting dislocated fingers? There is some of the stuff that even Ravel writes that I think, how on earth did he think that would ever be possible? But again, it's a question of trying to extend the technique.
It's interesting though, I mean, the idea of fingering as a style, let's put it that way, or fingering as a way of thinking about compositional, what comes out in the composition in terms of texture, or in terms of the effect or the mood that you want to create. It seems to me that you're by drawing on Ravel, for example, you're coming from a particular tradition, right, where there is this, I don't know whether it's a French tradition, but there is a very kind of almost an effortless virtuosity involved, right? And you're talking about that with your fingering. Whereas I think there's another tradition where that effort is part of the aesthetic. I mean, Beethoven wants to make you hear effort in that compositional process. And there are many composers that where effort becomes, or difficulty, let's put it that way, difficulty becomes something that is foreground. Do you have anything to say about thinking in these kind of ways, but still to do with fingering or to do with how you approach the instrument? I mean, Schumann, for example, is one where, I mean, he damaged himself basically in trying to create a music that was actually beyond his hand, but you can hear that effort. Yeah.
Well, in this particular instance, what we haven't looked at here is the other 2 fantasies. And the first one is horrifically difficult. And so, and Pum is nodding furiously. Yes. And so I didn't want to do that again. And it was, I didn't mean it to be difficult. I wanted it to be virtuosic. And that was the thing. Having done that, and the person who I wrote it for played it once and has never played it since. That's how bad it was. But I don't think it's bad music. It's just created without sufficient thought of the difficulty. It is playable, but it is really a really tough stretch. So I wanted to do the opposite thing. Right. I wanted to think about what can I do, and that's why I was so happy when I first came up with the Divine Arpeggio. It came to me in a dream. I actually saw the shape. I thought, oh, that is such an interesting shape harmonically. It is so easy to play. But that thing of those dominant sevenths rising by a minor seventh is frankly brilliant. I wish I'd thought of it. Yeah.
It reminds me of the first chord in Stravinsky's violin concert, which is incredibly easy, but and he didn't know how to play the violin.
Exactly.
It just came to me.
Yeah. So, but that was actually the germ of the whole piece, which is why it's not the first thing that happens in the fantasy, but it's the first thing that is the germ of what that fantasy is about. So, yes.
Came to you in a dream. Stravinsky said the same thing about the Rite of Spring. It came to me in a dream. I was the vessel in which the Rite of Spring came. So this is the divine channel to which it came to you. It was a dream. Amazing. I'm going to ask some composers here. There are 3 composers here. You surely have something to ask. Okay.
Hi, Carl. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much. So as as a composer as well. And also I see a lot of young composers, they are very obsessed with using the extended technique inside piano, like especially for piano solo. So I'm wondering how you think of this kind of point and how would you probably convince those stubborn composers to say, well, like without any extended technique, piano can be also very beautiful.
Look, one of my party pieces was the John Cage music for 2 prepared pianos. And it's a suite of dances that lasts, I think, about half an hour, 20 minutes. They are magical. It's like this enchanted gamelan. And I used to play that with a friend. We played it all around Australia. I can't remember where else we played it. That was in the 1980s. It is outlawed. You cannot play it now. No, and we used to go to a major concert hall, play on 2 Steinways. No one will let you do that now in Australia or America. I don't know about Hong Kong or the rest.
Sharon, do we allow people to damage our Steinway? If Carl does it, it's okay. Yeah, you can do it. You can do it here, Carl.
This is getting lumps of glass and great big industrial screws, and you put them in between the strings, and it's a fantastic sound. But it does damage the piano. And if you have a $500,000, well, I suppose in Hong Kong dollars, it's a $5 million instrument, you really can't do that. And I can tell you that there is not a single venue in Australia that will allow it. And if you insist on using it, even if you are just dampening a couple of strings, and it's also a wonderful technique, it actually leaves acid on the string and it eats into the string. I say, absolutely, yes, we've got the jazz piano at the back for you. And it's really not worth playing those pianos because everything's shot. So that's all I would say. It's a wonderful thing. If you can find a venue unconnected enough to give you the piano, then do it by all means. But it's really difficult.
So it's a matter of expediency rather than aesthetics.
Absolutely. Well, and logistics.
Yes. We do have to be practical as composers if you want your works to be performed. I should mention that Jing is having her piece performed on Saturday with the Symphony Orchestra, so please go to her concert as well. Okay, there are 2 more composers here. One more question from you guys. Who wants to have a go? Okay.
Carl, thank you so much for your presentation. I was so fascinated how you mentioned you have already composed 5 hours of piano music. As a so experienced composer, how do you keep your thinking, keep your spirit, you still have something to give into this genre of piano writing? Because as a young composer myself, looking at so many masterpieces before, sometimes I feel very frustrated to find something that I can still offer in writing some pieces.
Well, I can tell you my inspiration is mostly Ravel and thinking, why can't I write music that good? And so it's always what can I do to get that? It's a union of form and function that he has, and just this amazing effect that he has. So it's always trying to be Ravel. That's my inspiration. What can I do to improve my technique? What can I try to do something better next time? And so, I added it up. It is 5 hours. It's a lot of music. A lot of it has similar processes, but it has evolved over the years. And what I want to do is keep trying different things. So that's all you do. Become better.
It's funny, Poon was just saying before the talk that these 3 fantasies sound like, when put together, is a little bit like the Ravel with the Ondine and Scarborough and Guibert as well. So it's like Gaspar. So maybe, do you have anything to say on that, Poon? You should say something, I mean, he's talked so much about. You're gonna, okay, all right. Usually composers don't say anything and performers say everything, but it's fine. Any other questions? There's a question? Oh, from you? Yeah, from that, yes.
Hi. Oh, hi. I'm a student helper, but I'm also a dancer. So, and I've noticed that you have composed music, especially for ballet companies in Australia. And I was wondering about when you compose a piece about dance, do you compromise your music to make it more suitable for the choreographers, or that you just make the beautiful music and let the choreographers to do their jobs?
The problem with writing music for dance is choreographers. They're always the problem. But I can tell you, for instance, that my first piano sonata is probably the most famous work I've ever written. It was commissioned by a Sydney dance company. It was commissioned for a dance piece. And I was just very fortunate that the choreographer there said, I don't want you to write dance music, I want you to write good music, and I want you to write it as a concert piece. And that was stayed in the repertoire for 10 or 15 years, in the repertoire of that company. There are other, I've written 25 ballet scores. I think about 8 of them are full length, so they're 90 minutes of music each. The other ones are normally 20 or 30 minutes. I don't think any of them are really worth listening to again. Because you're writing a background. It's like writing a film score and then removing the film. So I never did what Stravinsky was able to do, for instance, which is write truly astonishing music that also worked with dance. So that I failed in that respect.
Oh, that's so sad. But Stravinsky also had a horrible time with with choreographers. And with the Rite of Spring, he really fell out with Nijinsky and trying to. Basically, he had to excise the whole of the dance to bit and just presented the Rite of Spring as a concert piece in the end. So maybe that is the secret, to write it as a concert piece first.
But he had a lot of big successes as well.
He was amazing.
Firebird and
yeah.
There's no music without a scenario, so I think we're actually turning it the other way around.
Possibly. But he wrote his own scenarios, which never happens now. If you write music these days, the choreographer tells you what the story is. They're frankly not very good.
Okay, we'll move on. Other questions? Ethan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for really caring for the pianists. I'm a violinist, so hopefully Paganini will do the same for violin, but I don't think that will be possible. But I have a question: when you compose, do you compose next to the piano so you know the flow of the piece? And then the second question is at the end, it's very interesting because you have a pause and then there's an end chord. So is it trying to say it's the end of the dream or end of the divine or something like that?
Well, no, the pause at the end is, I have this thing about making the final note land. So it's like an acrobatic routine. You have to have the rhythm and then you actually need to pause a moment and then you land. And so always it's finding exactly what that period, what the break is to make it land properly. And that's true in all music that I write. As for writing at the piano, yes, I've always written at the piano since I was 10 years old. Always wrote at the piano. It means that, particularly writing music for the piano, that's why I'm obsessed with hand positions, because I know that every bar is playable, because I can play every bar, I just can't play 2 bars at a time. And in my first sonata, I also made sure that I could play from half that bar to the half of the second. So I played over the join. But that is part of my writing technique. What I found hardest for was writing for strings, because strings, everything is 4 fingers. Piano, everything's 5 fingers. And with violin, if you write, I was abused by some friends, violinists, saying, we only have 4 fingers. The thumb has to hold up the instrument. And it's a different way of thinking. So composers take note, 4 notes for all the strings. Otherwise, they drop the instrument.
That is fascinating. I have to ask my colleague whether she has anything to say, because you work you do on hands and bodies and instruments. Do you have anything to say? I think this is so fascinating. Yeah, I'm sure you have a lot of wisdom here. I'm just fascinated with the conversation.
Thank you so much, Carl. I'm Yan Kim. I'm a musicologist. And today I was so inspired by your lecture because I recently wrote an article on piano fingering and effort as the expressive means. So it was really inspiring for me. And also, it's really, really rare opportunity for us to hear a composer's thought procedure and how the human body is centers in the compositional process. So thank you so much. My question, I think Giorgio asked the question that I wanted to ask, what virtuosity means to you. But so I will ask another question. Some of the scores edited by the pianist intentionally put difficult fingerings. For example, like for the scales, turning over for the simple scale passages are added by the pianist, not by the composer. So I'm just curious, like, are you going to present the scores to the pianist with the easy and comfortable fingering signs or not?
Well, it depends on the passage. And there are some passages, and it can be surprising, some passages that look quite easy, in fact, will only work if you start on the second or third finger. And in those instances, if you don't put that fingering in, the pianist will waste days trying to work out what the right fingering is. So in those instances, yes, and there is some fingering in this piece for passages that really cannot be played any other way, and it's knowing exactly how they lie. However, if it happens the pianist finds another fingering, of course. I don't think they will. In fact, I'm fairly sure they won't. But and I think in the three pieces, there's maybe, 20 notes that have fingering over them altogether. But they are these passages that are very particular. If you do it this way, it will work. You don't need to worry about it. But otherwise, no, it should always be up to the pianist. And everybody plays slightly differently. Yeah.
I think it's great because, your work and a lot of people's work now really think about these aspects of composition. How the piano as an instrument or to the keyboard, right, really determines a lot of compositional thinking. It's not just this sort of cerebral abstract kind of music, and also how your body interacts with that. I mean, those hands things that you described, it seemed very simple at the beginning, A flat major arpeggios, right? But actually, whole music can come out of thinking in this way. So to me, that was really, really fascinating. And I was wondering when you started thinking this way, because obviously when you were training as a composer, there was a very different kind of aesthetic at play, a kind of high modernism that required a much more cerebral, less embodied approach, right, to composition. So was there a change in you as a composer that suddenly said, you know what, I like this instrument. I'm going to use this in a kind of different way to think about composition?
Well, I've had a lot of different careers. One of them was running a contemporary music ensemble that just played chamber music that was newly commissioned. In 10 years, we commissioned 89 new works by composers. And so it was as a pianist in that group that I decided that composers needed to consider their musicians much better. So we worked with about 60 different composers. I would say 58 of them didn't think about the performers at all. And working in an ensemble where they don't understand what it is to have a sense of ensemble rhythm, where individual techniques on each instrument are not understood, writing things that look simple but are really difficult on that instrument idiomatically. That's what trained me to think, and in all my music, orchestral music, whatever it is, you must think about the performer. And if you don't know enough about the instrument, go and talk to somebody, learn how they work. Because all you are doing is allowing a barrier to grow between you and the performer as a composer. So it was that experience, 10 years of working with this chamber ensemble. I had very little time for composers who were not considerate of the instrument.
Oh, so let that be a lesson to all young composers. But it's true, though. I mean, it's very interesting to me. I mean, my last question, how you're thinking, and you're obviously thinking also tonally or between tonality and atonality, and you're thinking in terms of the keyboard, the fingers, and then looking at I'm kind of music theoretically sort of inclined, but looking at your analyses, you're using like guitar chords basically to describe movements from one pattern to another. Is that the only way of thinking about your music tonally? In other words, because the guitar chords only give you a kind of, as it were, pattern by pattern description of what's going on. There's no sort of there's no sense in which tonality is being anchored more than that, because they're just sort of free floating descriptions that you're giving us. I'm just thinking about, is that how you imagine your music? That actually tonality is detached in that kind of floating way, and it is a textural bar by bar flow, or is there something that's more that's going on here in your tonal and harmonic thinking?
What I want to avoid is the modernist approach of simply using tritones and clusters. And so that is the modernist approach. And basically you have the most bizarre sounds you can think of using tritones and then clusters, and then you alternate them. And I find that terribly boring because it's done so often. And what I find interesting is that the dusk in between tonality and atonality. And when for instance, if I took the Stravinsky chord, just a semitone apart, where does the tonality lie? And Schoenberg will tell you it lies with the lowest note. But that isn't the whole question. I mean, the whole answer. It's more subtle than that. I find the idea of superimposing, which Prokofiev did, of different tonalities, but then alter a few notes. And the Fantasia Divina is unusual because it does use mostly dominant sevenths. But what I will do is use slightly more complex chords, but then look at what is the tonal inference of that chord without descending into clusters and tritones. So that I find, there's boring, and this is, I find really interesting, is looking at that borderline and without simply going to triads.
Thank you very much. Now, is there any burning question before I end the session today? Because I wouldn't like anybody not to have a question. And I won't want to pick on anybody again. Oh, you do have a burning question. Very good, Wilson. Amazing. There you go.
Thank you for your talk very much today. So I have it's a pretty weird question, but do you think that as you focus a lot on in your talk, there's an idiom for each instrument or instrumentalist? Do you think there's an idiom for human beings or for performance in general or for the audience? Do you think this approach of thinking could extend to more than just instruments?
Well, that's a very large question. And I don't know, well, I do consider audiences as well. I don't compose for audiences, but I do think what is going to convince an audience to listen to my music rather than listening, as they always do, to Brahms or Stravinsky even, or Elliott Carter or whatever they're listening to. What is it that I can give the audience? And then there is a triple joint effect of the composer, the performer, and the audience. The good performers relate to the audience immediately. It's a tangible thing that happens when they perform. And a good audience, an audience who is thinking and concentrating, will feel it. They can feel it from the performer. And it's not mystical, it is something that I think is just animal. And in that phase of the process, the composer's irrelevant because you're not involved in that part of the process. What you have to do is set up something where that can happen. So you must do something that the performer can feel engaged with and that it gives them something. And then the audience will feel that and they give it back to the performer. And so, yeah, there is a combined three-part process. But it actually comes back, because I'm a composer, of course, it's all the composer's fault. But there is something about that whole system. Thank you.
Oh, there's another question. You see, we're getting going now. At the end, I'll get everyone to talk. This is the plan. Oh, you have a mic. Yeah.
Hello. Because you were talking about performers, I wanted to ask if there was a moment when a performer was playing your work and you heard it, for example, in the hall, was there a moment that the performer actually made you change your view or gave you certain ideas about a work that you composed?
It's my best wishes, yes, that has happened, yeah. And so a number of things that I've said very firmly should not happen in my music, and then someone makes it work. I have had to change my opinion. And I hold very strong opinions, you know, so I have to be proven wrong very deeply. But yes, that absolutely has happened, yeah. And so there's other things where I've simply made a mistake, that's different. But, and particularly, let's say with the first piano sonata, and I always said it has to be at the tempo that is written in the score. Turns out that wasn't quite true. What did have to happen was the change of gears through the work had to be absolutely exact. But in fact, you can still be flexible. So that was probably the biggest change that over a period of a decade I came to realise. Was a number of people who basically hit me around the head for a while until I could change that view.
Any other questions? Burning questions? Going? Gone. Well, you know, in a way, you've given us a divine lecture because, you know, God is the creator, and if God explains the world to you, that's amazing. And you're the creator of this fantasy, and you have given us an explanation of that creation. So thank you very much for a divine and fantastic lecture.